You don't simply walk into a room. You arrive. There is a difference, and it has little to do with status, wealth, or appearance. Truly confident people change the atmosphere through the way they carry themselves. They don't demand attention or announce their importance. Their composure, self-control, and quiet confidence naturally draw attention. Presence is not an inborn gift. It is the result of countless deliberate choices, disciplined habits, and the ability to remain steady under pressure. Machiavelli's The Prince was not written as an idealistic story about virtue. It was a practical study of leadership influence and the realities of power. Beneath its historical examples lies a timeless lesson. The world often rewards those who prepare, adapt, and understand human nature. Confidence is not built through wishful thinking. It is built through competence, judgment, and the discipline to act wisely when circumstances become difficult. In this guide, we will explore 4 foundations of commanding presence: your mind, your mouth, your moves, and your money. Together, these pillars shape how you think, communicate, act, and build lasting independence. Mastering them is not about dominating others. It is about mastering yourself. A person who thinks clearly, speaks with intention, acts decisively, and manages resources wisely becomes difficult to manipulate, difficult to intimidate, and impossible to ignore. This is not about projecting an image of power. It is about developing the inner architecture that creates genuine confidence. When your thoughts are disciplined, your words are measured, your actions are consistent, and your life is guided by purpose rather than impulse, your presence begins to speak long before you ever do. If you're ready to build that man, comment, "I am the king right now," because kings don't just watch content, they become it. Number 2, control your mind, the throne room within. Before you can control anything in this world, any room, any relationship, any outcome, you must first control the 6 inches between your ears. That is the real throne room, not an office, not a mansion, not a title. Your mind is where your kingdom either rises or collapses, and most men have surrendered that throne without even realizing it. They've handed it over to social media, to opinions, to fear, to the desperate need for approval from people who haven't built anything worth respecting. Machiavelli understood something that modern men are too distracted to see, that the most dangerous battlefield is internal. Your enemies don't need to defeat you if your own mind is already doing the work for them. Every time you spiral into self-doubt, every time you react emotionally instead of strategically, every time you let someone else's words live rent-free in your head, you're handing your throne to your enemy and smiling while you do it. A king thinks in outcomes, not emotions. He doesn't ask, "How does this make me feel?" He asks, "What does this position mean to gain?" He doesn't react to chaos, he studies it. He doesn't fear pressure. He uses it like a whetstone, letting it sharpen him while lesser men crack under the weight. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, a fortress of the mind that no external force could penetrate unless you open the gates. Machiavelli called it vert, the disciplined will to act with precision when the world demands panic. You need both. You need the Stoics' calm and the Prince's cold calculation running simultaneously in your mind at all times. Train your mind like a weapon, protect it like a kingdom. Because a king who loses his mind first loses everything else second. Comment, "My mind is my empire," if this is hitting different right now. Number 3, control your mouth. Silence is a weapon. The most powerful thing a king can do in a conversation is nothing absolute silence, controlled, deliberate, weaponized silence. Most men cannot stop talking. They fill every gap, every pause, every moment of tension with words. Because silence makes them uncomfortable. Because they need to be heard. Because somewhere deep inside, there's still that boy desperately trying to prove himself to a room that wasn't even paying attention. You don't simply walk into a room. You arrive. There is a difference. Most people enter hoping to be noticed. A truly formidable person enters already knowing who they are. They do not chase attention, announce their importance, or compete for the spotlight. Their composure changes the atmosphere before they speak a single word. Presence is not a gift bestowed at birth. It is forged through disciplined habits, difficult decisions, and the quiet confidence that comes from mastering yourself. Machiavelli's The Prince was never meant to comfort the idealist. It was written to educate the strategist. Beneath its political lessons lies a timeless principle. The world rarely rewards good intentions alone. It rewards preparation, competence, and the ability to remain composed when others lose control. Real authority is not built on appearance or charisma. It is built on judgment, self-restraint, and the willingness to act with purpose when circumstances become uncertain. In this journey, we will examine the 4 pillars of commanding presence: your mind, your mouth, your moves, and your money. These are the foundations of a person who cannot be easily manipulated or intimidated. Your mind determines how you think under pressure. Your mouth determines the weight of your words. Your moves reveal your discipline and intentions. Your money reflects your independence and ability to create choices. Together, they form the architecture of lasting influence. This is not about pretending to be powerful or performing confidence for an audience. It is about becoming the kind of person whose character speaks before their voice does. When your mind remains calm, your words are deliberate, your actions are consistent, and your life is guided by purpose rather than impulse. Your presence becomes undeniable. You no longer need to convince people of your strength. They recognize it instinctively, because true authority is never shouted. It is quietly lived. Speak with precision. Speak with purpose. Speak only when your words will either build something, destroy something, or move something forward. Everything else is noise, and kings don't make noise, they make moves. The man who masters his mouth masters the perception others have of him. And perception in this world is everything. It is the invisible crown that either sits on your head or gets knocked off by your own loose tongue. Guard your words like a fortress guards its gates. Let only what is necessary pass through. Comment: silence is my sword right now if you understand what I just handed you. Number 4. Control your moves. Never let them see you coming. A king never moves without intention. Every step is calculated. Every decision is deliberate. Every action is the result of a mind that has already played the game 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still reacting to what just happened. This is the essence of Machiavellian strategy, not cruelty, not manipulation for its own sake, but the cold, disciplined art of moving through the world with such precision that your enemies are always one step behind and your allies are always one step ahead. Most men are reactive. Something happens and they respond immediately, emotionally, impulsively, without thinking about consequences, without considering the chessboard. Without asking the most important question a strategic mind can ask: who benefits from my reaction right now? Because here's what the weak never understand. Chaos is manufactured. Drama is engineered. Provocations are designed to pull you off your throne and drag you down to a level where you can be controlled, where you can be manipulated, where you can be made to look small. And every time you take that bait, every time you move out of emotion instead of strategy, you are dancing in someone else's choreography without even knowing the music was playing. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must be both the lion and the fox, the lion to crush what stands in his way, and the fox to navigate what cannot be crushed. The power lies in knowing which approach a moment requires. Strength without wisdom often becomes recklessness, while strategy without integrity can become manipulation. Lasting influence comes from combining confidence with thoughtful judgment. Moving with the calm awareness of someone who has already considered the possibilities before taking the first step. Such a person is difficult to pressure because their decisions are guided by purpose rather than impulse. There is also value in remaining measured rather than predictable. Predictability is not about being consistent in your values. That is a strength. It is about becoming so emotionally reactive that others always know exactly how to provoke or distract you. When your responses are thoughtful instead of automatic, people find it much harder to manipulate your decisions. Your composure becomes one of your greatest advantages because it prevents others from controlling your next move. Before taking action, study the environment around you. Understand the people you choose to trust, the opportunities you choose to pursue, and the habits that quietly shape your future. Just as importantly, study yourself. Notice the patterns that strengthen your character and the ones that repeatedly lead you away from your goals. Every routine either reinforces the life you want to build or slowly erodes it through neglect. Never act from desperation, unchecked anger, or the need to prove yourself to someone else's expectations. Decisions made in moments of emotional intensity often create consequences that outlast the emotion itself. Instead, when your choices align with your principles, advance your long-term vision, protect what truly matters, or resolve a problem before it grows into something far more difficult to overcome. That is the difference between reacting to life and leading it. That is how a king moves, not loudly, not hastily, not emotionally, but with the quiet, unstoppable momentum of a man who already knows where he's going and has already decided that nothing in this world will stop him from getting there. Comment. I move in silence, I arrive in power. If you felt that in your bones. Number 5, control your money. Wealth is your armor. Let me tell you something that the broke and the bitter will never admit out loud. Out loud, money is not just currency. Money is language. It is the language of options, the language of leverage, the language of freedom. And a king who does not speak that language fluently is not a king at all. He is a prisoner wearing a crown. Most men have a deeply broken relationship with money, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack talent, but because they were never taught to see money as a tool of power. They were taught to see it as a reward for obedience. Show up, work hard, follow the rules, collect your check. And somewhere in that cycle of obedience, they lost the most important thing a man can possess, his financial sovereignty. Because here is the cold, uncomfortable truth that Machiavelli would tell you without apology. A man who depends on others for his financial survival can never truly be free. He can never speak his full truth. He can never walk away from what dishonors him. He can never make decisions from a place of pure strategy. Because every decision he makes is shadowed by the question he is too afraid to ask himself, can I afford to? That question is a chain, and chains, no matter how golden they appear, are still chains. A king builds his financial life like he builds his kingdom, with architecture, with intention, with long-term vision that refuses to be seduced by short-term pleasure. He does not spend to impress. He does not buy status symbols to fill voids that money was never designed to fill. He does not confuse looking wealthy with being wealthy, because one is a performance and the other is a position. And kings hold positions, they don't perform them. Machiavelli understood that financial independence is not just about comfort, it is about power. It is about having the ability to act without permission to move, without asking to build, without begging. Every dollar a king saves is a soldier in his army. Every investment he makes is a fortress being constructed on new territory. Every unnecessary expense he eliminates is a weakness being removed from his armor. He thinks about money, not in terms of what it can buy him today, but in terms of what it can build him tomorrow. Because wealth is not a destination, it is a weapon. And like every weapon a king possesses, It must be maintained, sharpened, and deployed with precision. Study money the way you study your enemies, obsessively, patiently, without emotion. Understand where it flows, why it flows, and how to position yourself in the path of that flow. Build multiple streams, because a king never relies on a single river to sustain his entire kingdom. Live below your means, not out of poverty consciousness, but out of strategic discipline, because the man who controls his spending controls his future, and the man who controls his future controls his life, and a man who controls his life answers to no one. Let that sink in. No one. Not a boss who underpays him. Not a system designed to keep him dependent. Not a relationship that uses financial pressure as a means of control. A financially sovereign man is a dangerous man. Dangerous to every structure that profits from his dependency. Build that danger. Cultivate it deliberately. Protect it fiercely, because your money is not just your security. It is your silence when you need to walk away, your strength when you need to stand firm, and your crown when you need to remind the world exactly who it is dealing with. Comment: my wealth is my weapon right now. Because if this section just rewired something in your mind, I need to know you were here for it. Number 6. The power of isolation. Kings build in silence. There is a moment in every serious man's life where he has to make a decision that the world around him will not understand, will not support, and will not celebrate. There comes a moment in a person's life when the most powerful decision is not to speak louder, work harder for attention, or remain constantly visible. It is the decision to step back, to leave behind the noise, the endless performance, and the pressure to always be present, and turn inward. In that quiet space, something far more valuable than recognition begins to develop clarity. The people who choose depth over distraction, creation over consumption, and purposeful solitude over constant stimulation often return with a kind of confidence that cannot be manufactured or borrowed. It is earned through time reflection and disciplined effort. Many people fear isolation because they confuse it with loneliness. They assume that stepping away from the crowd is a sign of failure or disconnection. Yet, in a culture that rewards constant visibility, choosing periods of intentional invisibility can feel almost revolutionary. It often makes others uncomfortable, not because there is something wrong with the person who withdraws, but because it challenges the belief that worth must always be measured by attention, approval, or activity. That discomfort does not have to become your burden. It often reflects the expectations and habits of those observing you, rather than any flaw in your decision. Solitude, when chosen with purpose, is not an escape from life. It is an opportunity to reconnect with it. It creates distance from the opinions, distractions, and constant demands that can gradually drown out your own judgment and values. Think of solitude as a workshop rather than a prison. It is where distractions lose their influence, priorities become clearer, and character is strengthened away from the spotlight. Without the constant pressure to perform for others, you gain the freedom to examine your thinking, refine your goals, and build a life that reflects your principles instead of someone else's expectations. The confidence developed in that silence is difficult to imitate because it is rooted not in applause, but in self-mastery. And he finally gets alone with the only voice that actually matters, the cold, clear, strategic voice of his own sovereign mind. Machiavelli spent years in exile, stripped of his position, removed from power, cast out from the very city he had served. And what did he do in that isolation? He wrote The Prince. He transformed his exile into architecture. He turned his silence into one of the most powerful manuscripts on power and strategy the world has ever read. That is what a king does with isolation. He doesn't survive it, he weaponizes it. He uses the quiet to study what others are too distracted to see. He uses the stillness to plan what others are too reactive to think about. He uses the absence of noise to hear the signal clearly, the signal of his purpose, his direction, his next move. Think about every man you have ever admired for his power, his composure, his unshakable presence. I guarantee you that behind that presence was a season of isolation that nobody photographed, nobody applauded, and nobody knew about until the results became impossible to ignore. Because greatness is not built in the crowd. It is built in the cave. It is built in the early mornings before the world wakes up. It is built in the late nights when lesser men have already surrendered to comfort. It is built in the deliberate, disciplined, unglamorous hours of a man alone with his vision, refusing to let the world's timeline dictate his own. Guard your solitude. Like guards his most strategic territory. Be deeply selective about whose energy you allow into your space, because energy is contagious, and a man surrounded by people who are comfortable with mediocrity will find mediocrity slowly, invisibly infecting his own ambitions, not through one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small surrenders disguised as socializing, relaxing, just having fun. Kings have fun. Kings enjoy life. But kings never confuse recreation with construction. They know the difference between a moment of rest and a life of drift. They know that every hour spent in genuine isolation, reading, thinking, planning, building, is an hour invested in a version of themselves that the world is not yet ready for. And when that version finally arrives, the world will not be able to look away. Pull back. Go quiet. Build in the dark. Let them wonder what happened to you. Let them speculate. Let them talk. Let them misread your silence as defeat, because while they are busy watching your absence, you will be busy constructing your arrival. And when you return, and you will return, you will not return as the man who left. You will return as something they do not have a name for yet, something composed, something calculated, something that carries the unmistakable weight of a man who went into the fire alone and came out forged. Comment. I build in silence. I rise in power right now. Because if this section just gave you permission to embrace your isolation without apology, then you already understand something that most men in your life never will. Number 7. The art of reading people. Never be surprised again. A king is never blindsided, not because the world stopped being unpredictable, not because betrayal stopped existing, not because people suddenly became honest and transparent and safe, but because a king has developed something that most men neglect entirely: the cold, precise, almost surgical ability to read people before they reveal themselves, to see the move before it is made, to understand the motive before it is acted upon, to recognize the mask before it slips. And this skill, this dark, essential, underrated skill, is the difference between a man who is constantly reacting to what people do to him and a man who has already anticipated it, already prepared for it, and already positioned himself 3 steps ahead of it. Most men are shockingly naive about the people in their lives. They take words at face value. They confuse kindness with loyalty. They mistake proximity with alliance. They see a smiling face and assume a clean heart because they are projecting their own intentions onto others, measuring everyone else by the standards of their own honesty. And that projection is not noble. It is dangerous. It is a vulnerability that the wrong people will exploit without hesitation and without remorse. Machiavelli was ruthlessly clear on this. Men are driven by self-interest. Not all men, not always, but enough of them, enough of the time that a wise man never forgets it. This is not cynicism. This is calibration. It is the ability to see human nature clearly without the distortion of wishful thinking, without the fog of emotional attachment clouding your strategic vision. Watch what people do, not what they say. Words are the cheapest currency in human interaction. Anyone can construct a sentence designed to make you feel safe, feel valued, feel chosen. But behavior is expensive. Behavior costs something. Time, energy, sacrifice, consistency. And a man who watches behavior over time will learn more about a person's true character than 1,000 conversations ever could. Study the people around you the way Machiavelli studied his political rivals, dispassionately, systematically, without the need to immediately judge or react. Watch how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Watch how they speak about others when those others are not in the room. Watch what they do when they think no one is paying attention, because that is when the mask loosens, when the performance drops, when the real architecture of a person's character becomes briefly beautifully visible. Learn to observe body language, not as a trick for reading minds, but as one source of information among many. The way a person carries themselves, their posture, facial expressions, tone of voice, and eye contact can provide useful clues about their comfort, confidence, or emotional state. These signals are valuable when considered alongside the context and the person's words, not as proof of what they are thinking, but as pieces of a larger picture. A thoughtful observer pays attention before reaching conclusions. Brief changes in facial expression, hesitation before answering, shifts in posture or changes in tone may suggest that someone is uncertain, uncomfortable, or carefully considering their response. However, no single behavior reliably reveals deception or hidden motives. Wise judgment comes from gathering multiple observations over time rather than relying on isolated moments or assumptions. Approach people with curiosity instead of certainty. Do not build opinions based on who you hope they are or who you fear they might become. Instead, pay attention to patterns. Character is revealed less by dramatic declarations than by consistent behavior. The promises people keep, the way they treat others. When nothing is at stake, the habits they repeat and the choices they make under pressure often tell a far more reliable story than any single conversation. The strongest judgments are grounded in evidence accumulated over time. Observe patiently, listen carefully, and allow actions to carry more weight than impressions. Most people reveal their values gradually through ordinary moments that others overlook. When you learn to notice those patterns without rushing to conclusions, your decisions become clearer, your trust becomes wiser, and your understanding of others becomes more accurate. And once you have truly seen someone, once you have stripped away the performance and looked directly at the pattern beneath it, you cannot unsee them. You now possess something priceless: clarity. The cold, liberating, strategically invaluable clarity of a man who knows exactly who is standing in front of him and can therefore decide with precision how much access, how much trust, how much of his sovereign energy that person deserves to receive. Some will deserve your full alliance. Most will deserve your polite distance. A few will deserve nothing but your awareness of their presence and your refusal to turn your back. Categorize people not with cruelty, but with accuracy. Not out of paranoia, but out of the deep disciplined self-respect of a man who understands that his inner circle is his most strategic asset, and that the wrong person inside that circle can unravel in months what took years of isolation, sacrifice, and silent construction to build. Protect your circle like a king protects his court. Audit it, ruthlessly upgrade it, consistently, and never not once. Let sentimentality override your intelligence when the evidence is already sitting directly in front of you. Comment, I see clearly. I move wisely right now, because the man who masters the art of reading people stops being a victim of them forever. Number 8. The Code of Loyalty. Who deserves your kingdom? There is nothing more expensive in a king's life than misplaced loyalty. Nothing. Not a bad investment, not a failed strategy, not a lost opportunity, because money can be rebuilt. Strategies can be revised and opportunities have a way of returning to a man who is prepared for them. But time given to the wrong people, energy poured into those who were never truly in your corner, that cannot be recovered, that is gone permanently, irretrievably gone. And the painful reality that most men refuse to confront until the damage has already been done is this: not everyone who is close to you is loyal to you. Not everyone who smiles with you is building with you. Not everyone who calls you a brother, a friend, a confidant, has your actual interests anywhere in the architecture of their intentions. Some people are in your life because of what you represent to them. Some are there because of what you provide. Some are there because your proximity gives them access, gives them status, gives them a reflection of success they have not yet earned for themselves. And the moment you stop being useful, the moment your season of struggle arrives, the moment you make a decision that no longer serves their agenda, you will discover with brutal, clarifying precision exactly what that relationship was actually built on. Machiavelli understood loyalty not as a sentiment, but as a structure. He distinguished clearly between those who are bound to a prince by necessity and those who are bound by genuine allegiance. And he warned with the cold precision of a man who had been betrayed by his own city that the difference between the two is invisible until the moment of crisis arrives, and by then it is usually too late to reposition. So a king does not wait for the crisis to reveal his court. He studies his court before the crisis. He tests, quietly observes patiently, and withdraws strategically. Not with drama, not with accusations, but with the silent, methodical intelligence of a man who is auditing his kingdom with the same ruthless precision he applies to every other domain of his life. Real loyalty is rare. Understand that first. Accept it without bitterness and without the naive expectation that everyone around you is operating at your level of integrity. They are not. Most people are loyal to their own comfort, their own advancement, their own survival. There is nothing unusual about people acting in ways that reflect their own interests, fears, or incentives. That is part of human nature. The mistake is not recognizing that reality. A thoughtful leader understands that people are shaped by their circumstances, motivations, and priorities. By accepting this without becoming cynical, you're less likely to be caught off guard by avoidable disappointments. Clear judgment allows you to respond with wisdom instead of surprise. An equally important question is one that many people rarely ask. Who has truly earned your loyalty? Too often, we focus on gaining acceptance from others without pausing to consider whether those relationships are built on mutual trust and respect. Loyalty is valuable, but it should not be given automatically because of history, familiarity, or shared experiences alone. It becomes meaningful when it is supported by consistent actions over time. Evaluate relationships by observing patterns rather than relying solely on emotions. Do the people around you encourage your growth, or do they quietly discourage it? Are they willing to tell you difficult truths when honesty is necessary, or do they only say what is convenient? Can they celebrate your success without resentment, and do they remain dependable when circumstances become challenging? These questions help reveal the strength and authenticity of a relationship far more than words alone. This is not about becoming suspicious of everyone or withholding trust indefinitely. It is about practicing discernment. Healthy relationships are built through mutual respect, reliability, and shared values demonstrated consistently over time. When you learn to invest your trust and loyalty where they are genuinely earned, you strengthen not only your relationships, but also your ability to build a life surrounded by people who contribute to your growth rather than quietly holding it back. These are strategic assessments, and a king makes them without guilt, without apology, and without the crippling fear of being seen as cold or calculating, because the alternative is a kingdom populated by people who were never truly loyal to it. slowly eroding everything from the inside while wearing the face of friendship. Shrink your circle without announcement. Elevate your standards without explanation. Extend your deepest loyalty only to those who have paid for it, in the currency that actually matters. Consistent, unglamorous, pressure-tested action over time. And to those rare, extraordinary individuals who have proven themselves in the fire. The ones who told you the truth when lies would have been easier, who stayed when leaving would have been more convenient, who protected your name in rooms you were never in. May, to those people be a king in return. Be immovable in your loyalty. Be ferocious in your protection of them. Be the kind of man whose alliance is so valuable, so rare, so strategically and emotionally fortifying that they consider it one of the defining privileges of their life. Because a king who inspires that quality of loyalty from even 2 or 3 people in his lifetime has built something more powerful than any empire made of stone. He has built a brotherhood forged in trust. And that is the foundation that no enemy, no circumstance, and no season of adversity can ever fully dismantle. Comment. Loyalty is earned, not given right now, because if this just made you think about your circle differently, that clarity alone is worth more than you know. Number 9. The untouchable mindset. When they can't break you, they fear you. There is a version of you that nothing in this world can reach. No rejection, no failure, no betrayal, no public humiliation, no season of loss, no opinion, no criticism, no carefully constructed attack on your character or your confidence. A version of you that absorbs everything, every blow, every setback, every attempt to diminish or destabilize, and converts it quietly and without performance into fuel. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for a chosen few who are born with unshakable confidence and iron composure. It is a construction, a deliberate, disciplined, painstakingly built psychological architecture that any man with enough commitment and enough self-awareness can erect around his mind, his identity, and his sense of self-worth. But it requires something that most men are unwilling to pay: the complete and total surrender of the need for external validation. And that price is higher than most men realize, because we live in a world that is engineered deliberately, systematically engineered to make you dependent on approval. From the moment you were old enough to understand praise and punishment, you were being conditioned to perform for the crowd, to adjust yourself based on reactions, to measure your worth by the feedback of others, to need the nod, the like, the applause, the recognition to feel legitimate. And that conditioning runs so deep in most men that they don't even recognize it as a chain. They experience it as personality. They call it caring what people think. They dress it up as humility, as social awareness, as emotional intelligence. Underneath all of those polite disguises, it is still the same thing. A man whose internal state is being controlled by forces outside himself, and a man whose internal state can be controlled from the outside, is a man who can be broken from the outside. He can be broken with silence. Withhold the approval and watch him spiral. He can be broken with criticism. Land the right words in the right wound and watch him collapse. He can be broken with rejection. Remove the acceptance he has been performing for and watch his entire identity destabilize. But the untouchable man, the man who has done the brutal, unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable work of building his worth from the inside out, that man cannot be reached by any of those weapons. Because those weapons only work on men who need something from the people wielding them, and he needs nothing. Not your approval, not your understanding, not your validation of his choices, his vision, his path, or his identity. He has already validated himself. Not out of arrogance, not out of delusion, but out of the deep, earned, evidence-based knowledge of a man who has been tested, who has survived, who has looked directly at his own darkness and his own weakness without flinching, and decided that he is still unequivocally worth building. Machiavelli's prince did not govern by seeking love. He governed by commanding respect. And he understood the critical distinction between the two. Love can be withdrawn. Love is conditional emotional subject to the shifting tides of other people's moods and needs and agendas. Respect that lasts is rarely won through appearances or loud displays of confidence. It is earned through consistency, composure, and the quiet reliability of someone who remains grounded under pressure. A person who responds thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively, who holds to their principles without seeking constant validation, gradually develops a reputation that speaks more loudly than any attempt at self-promotion. When you stop allowing every criticism to dictate your emotions, conversations begin to change. When you no longer feel compelled to justify every decision to people who are determined to misunderstand you, you reclaim both your time and your peace of mind. And when you stop pursuing approval from those who have never genuinely supported your growth, their opinions naturally lose much of their influence over your choices. One of the most significant shifts in personal confidence occurs when your self-worth depends less on external validation and more on living in accordance with your own values. This is not arrogance or indifference to feedback. It is the ability to distinguish between constructive criticism that helps you grow and opinions that simply reflect another person's preferences, assumptions, or insecurities. That distinction allows you to remain open to learning without becoming controlled by every judgment. People often recognize this kind of confidence before they can describe it. They notice someone who is calm, without being passive, self-assured, without being boastful and composed, without needing to dominate the room. There is a quiet steadiness in a person who is not constantly trying to impress, defend, or prove themselves. That quiet confidence inspires trust and respect because it signals something difficult to imitate a character that remains stable regardless of changing circumstances or public opinion. It triggers caution. It triggers the involuntary recognition that this man operates by a different set of rules. Rules that were written not by society, not by fear, not by the desperate need to belong, but by a man who sat alone in his own silence long enough to author his own code and commit to it with his entire being. That is what makes a man untouchable. Not wealth alone, not status alone, not physical dominance or social influence, or any external marker of power that can be stripped away by circumstance. What makes a man truly untouchable is the unshakable, internally anchored, pressure-tested knowledge of exactly who he is and the absolute refusal to become anything less, regardless of what the world demands, offers, threatens, or takes away. Become that man. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are perfect. Not when the world finally gives you permission. Now, in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of whatever season you are currently navigating, decide right now that you are no longer available to be broken. Decide that your identity is no longer a negotiation. Decide that your peace of mind is no longer an occasional luxury, but a non-negotiable priority. Protect it with the same care that a wise leader protects what is most valuable. Your attention, emotional balance, and sense of purpose are limited resources. When you learn to guard them intentionally, you become far less vulnerable to distractions, unnecessary conflict, and the expectations that constantly compete for your energy. Life will challenge your composure. There will always be criticism, setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments designed to test your patience. You cannot control every circumstance, but you can choose how you respond. Each time you refuse to let frustration dictate your actions, you strengthen a quality that cannot be taken away: self-command. Over time, people begin to recognize that your stability is not dependent on favorable conditions, but on the discipline you have built within yourself. That consistency earns trust and respect far more reliably than intimidation ever could. If this message has changed the way you think about resilience leadership, or personal growth, pause for a moment and ask yourself what principle you will begin applying today. Ideas become valuable only when they influence decisions. One deliberate action is worth far more than 100 inspiring thoughts left unpracticed. This is not the end of a discussion. It is the beginning of a practice. Every principle you have encountered is only potential until it becomes part of the way you live. Machiavelli's writings were not intended as abstract philosophy alone. They challenged readers to think strategically about leadership, judgment, and human nature. The same challenge remains today. Take what is useful, apply it consistently, refine it through experience, and build a life guided not by impulse or circumstance, but by clarity, discipline, and purpose. He wrote for men who apply. Knowledge without execution is just entertainment, and kings are not entertained, they are transformed. You now carry 4 pillars: mind, mouth, moves, and money. Guard them, master them, build with them daily, quietly, without apology, and without permission. The world will not make space for your kingdom. You will have to claim it. Brick by brick, decision by decision, silence by silence. The throne was never going to be handed to you. It was always going to be built by you. So, go build it. Go become the man this world cannot ignore, cannot manipulate, and cannot break. Comment: I am the king one final time. Let that be your declaration, not just to this channel, but to yourself. Before you leave, watch this next lesson. It reveals the one mistake that makes intelligent people lose respect without realizing it.